Hey guys, how are you doing? Remember I said last tutorial that this one would be about UV unwrapping? Well, sorry, it isn't. There's something we need to do, and we can do it before UV unwrapping, and it's more fun than UV unwrapping, so let's. And what we're going to do today is we're gonna start trying to match the lighting of our CG scene to the lighting of our backplate. There is one straightforward way to do that, but it does require a piece of gear that I don't own, and that would be a 360 degrees camera. So what you would do with a 360 degrees camera, if we come right here into Blender, you'd place the camera somewhere about here, and you would take a bunch of different photos with this camera, all of them with a slightly different exposure, and by doing that, you can essentially capture the lighting that was there. You create an HDRI, a high dynamic range image, for that specific location. Now, I would love to buy a 360 degrees camera, but it's a little bit out of budget for me right now, so we have to make do with what we got. So one of the ways that we could think about that is we would just try to position lights in all the different light sources that we have in a scene. That works better for an interior shot. So if you have an interior shot like in your bedroom, you can just put an area lamp where your window is. In my case, it would be right over there, and try to match the light color and intensity. I have the monitor here. I can just put a light on the monitor, weaker, and just try to match it if I wanted to have like a CG hat or something, which, I mean, of course I want. But for an exterior shot like this, we're gonna cheat a little, and we're gonna come right over here to a website called Hdri Haven. This is how the website looks when you open it up. You come over to HDRI, and you have a bunch of HDRIs that are completely free. So you have this, empty warehouse HDRI. You can just click here and look around in the space. I think this is pretty cool. And just look around and see how the lighting is going to be. Another thing that's really helpful is these spheres. You have here a glass sphere, a white sort of matte sphere, a reflective metal sphere, and a reflective non-metallic sphere. These spheres, what they do is they show us how the lighting is going to look like in one particular scene. Another thing that could be really helpful is if we just had let's say, a styrofoam ball about the size of a volleyball, and we had it on a stick in the center of the scene. Then we can put a CG ball next to it and compare the lighting. A styrofoam ball is way cheaper than a 360 degrees camera, but we're gonna have to just kind of eyeball it. Thankfully, on our scene, what I've been using to help me out is this Volkswagen Beetle that I have right over here. It's very handy at showing me the light direction in the scene. But anyway, back to Hdri Haven. I've looked around the website, and this HDRI right here looks close enough to what we have in our shot. I'm gonna download the 8K version of this and save. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the shading workspace. For some reason, my ship only has this weird material here. The reason why the spaceship is behaving weird, I'm probably going to leave this in the tutorial. I could just re-record it or just cut this out, but I'm probably going to leave it in. It's because the spaceship, I've made a mistake and I've put the spaceship in the background collection. Now I just move it to the foreground and yay, it's working! Wonderful! What this preview mode here gives us, the material preview, it gives us obviously a preview of what our scene is going to look like. So if I come right down here, I can change it to use the scene lights and the scene world. If I deactivate this, this is showing me how the material would look like with one HDRI. It's this one right here that they're using. They have a few preset HDRIs that are just useful for trying to do something real quick. They have all these different options. You can rotate stuff around. But if we use scene lights and scene world, then our light is being used right here. This is one light that we have in the scene, and as you can see, I can move it around and it affects the object. But also, if I come right over here in the shading workspace to world, I can add my HDRI, and I do that by Shift A, looking for an environment texture. I'm gonna open up the HDRI that I've downloaded. It's right in here, and I'm gonna load it up, load that in, and I'm just gonna hit Control T. The reason for me to hit Control T, now I have this texture coordinate and mapping node. Again, I need to have in Edit Preferences add-ons Node Wrangler activated. If you don't have Node Wrangler activated, this isn't gonna work. But now what we can do is we can rotate our HDRI around until it just sort of lines up with our scene so that the light direction is the same. If you look in this shot, the light is sort of coming from this direction. This is the lightest place. But if you look at this sphere over here, it is still pretty dead on top. And because you can see the light directions this, because here the shadows extend a bit and here they don't. But if we come over to our camera and on background images we set it to be 100% opaque, we can see that this is pretty similar to what we have. We have this shadows coming in from like right over here, and the strongest light is coming from this direction. I just grab this light, and with Shift S, if I have having my cursor at the origin, I can have, with my light selected, I can have Shift S, selection to cursor. I just place the camera, the light where the cursor is, and I'll turn it into a sun lamp. 0 my rotation. What the sun lamp does, it's a very unique type of lamp because the position doesn't really matter. That's why it's dead center in the scene, because it doesn't matter. The sun lamp is all about the rotation. So I'm just going to ever so slightly rotate the light. And as you can see, if we just had, I'm just worried about the light direction now. I know that this is way too strong, but this is also sort of coming in this direction. You have a little bit of fall off from the shadow over here, so I'm just going to slightly turn my sun lamp like this. So if you look on the side view, and on front view, and on top view, yeah, this is kind of what I want. Right? Maybe more like this. All right. Now, this is way too strong. Right here, I'm going to select the light, and I'm going to lower its intensity. I'm just going to set it to 0, because I know that that's not enough. And I'm just going to increase the lighting a bit until it kind of matches the light that I have over on this car right here. And the color, this is perfectly white. Just going to make it ever so slightly yellowy, just to match a little bit the light that we have on this car, with very low saturation, because I want it to be as strong as possible. This might be too strong. I'm just going to lower the intensity right here. I'm just basically eyeballing and trying to measure. This isn't a precise workflow, okay? It's not going to give me a whole amount of precision, but it's going to give me a result that is close enough. All right, I'm just trying to match the intensity of the highlight over here. And over here, I can just control the darker areas, because this is the light that's going to affect the areas that aren't directly hit by the sunlight and would sort of simulate the light bounces. I mean, we're going to have light bounces, but we don't have a scene setup. If we have a fully 3D scene and we place an object in, all the other objects are going to reflect light in a realistic way. Because we don't have that, I'm just going to lower this a bit until it kind of matches and lines up. I'm looking at the dark part of this car over here just for reference. This is the very basic of just getting the lighting to match a little bit. So if I hit F12 now, just to render, this is what we get. Yeah, Blender crashed. Thank God I saved. I'm just gonna hit F12 again, and this time I'm not gonna pause. I'm not gonna do anything with it, because loading render kernels always takes a while. As you can see, this is how the scene looks like now. The spaceship is way lighter than everything else. It's way lighter than it should be. We're gonna fix that. But before we do you remember that this image right here that we have in the background? If we come over to the compositing workspace, what do we have here? We have, if I Control Shift again with Node Wrangler enabled, if I Control Shift click, we have this image here. Then we undistort it, scale it, and we apply the shadow over it, and then we apply the spaceship. And this is our render so far. Do you remember that this image right over here, and you're going to realize this image right over here is being undistorted. So Blender cancels out the lens distortion because the CG render doesn't have lens distortion. Of course, we can just duplicate this here and place it at the end and sort of redo the distortion and redistort everything. We could do that. We're not gonna bother. As you can see, Blender has the image that we're using here is the sharpened footage. And this is the same image that we have in our camera background. If we select our camera and look at it right over here, we have our camera background. So we could just come over here and load up our unsharpened footage. right? This is what we have to do. And now we have a better view. So I'm just going to Control Z real quick. I'm going to duplicate it because I don't want to lose this one just for comparison's sake. But we're just going to load in the unsharp footage. As you can see, this gives me a very different effect, and this is closer to what we want. And now we have a better idea of how everything should look like in our scene. It's really important that we use this one. Of course, as I told you when we were making this isn't a final product. But now the problem is I can very jolly well come over here to my camera and load up my unsharp footage. The problem is I'm just going to zoom in right over here at this car. I'm going to toggle between them. And as you can see, Blender isn't automatically correcting the lens distortion on this footage anymore. I do have this button here called Render Undistorted. And if I toggle that, you'll see that it deactivates the distortion, but only for the footage that we used for tracking. If we move back to here, Blender does nothing. So all we need to do is we need to render this, the image with the distortion in the right scale. The scale doesn't matter. The scale is only important if we have a resolution that's different than 100%. So we're just going to render this. So I could just place this into compositing, into composite, which as you know is my output node, and render it, right? The problem is if I hit render, Blender is going to render the entire scene, the entire 3D scene that we have right here, and then throw it away and just save this file, which is a waste of time. So the way to go around that is creating a new view layer called something. I don't know, I don't really care. And deactivate everything in this view layer. So as you can see, we got nada. We don't even have a camera on this view layer. We have nada. I'm just gonna save real quick. I'm gonna use Eevee because that's faster for this kind of work. It doesn't really matter. I can just set the render to one sample in Eevee and it's gonna be fine. And I'm gonna choose an RGB output for on color management. I'm going to choose standard because that's going to give me a more, if I have filmic, and you can see it kind of blurs things out. If I have standard, it doesn't. It's truer. And by the way, this is if we just come back to my foreground view layer and we just look at the rendering, this is going to affect my render as well. This is way too bright in standard, but it looks kind of okay in filmic. This gives me a truer view of what I have to do, how much I have to lower my exposure. I can just lower the exposure right here, but that lowers globally. I can lower it over here, not on Eevee, and that lowers it globally. But I can lower that in compositing later. Anyway, I can use something like false color and stuff like that but anyway, this is just going to give me a closer result to what I actually want. But anyway, I'm gonna come to this view layer called something that has everything turned off, and I'm gonna choose this option here under view layer properties, which is render single layer. It is only going to render this one view layer right here, and I'm actually gonna save Blender and choose my output path over here. I'm just going to I just find it easier over here in my footage. I am going to choose my footage called I'm going to create a new folder called unsharp undistort, and this is the path that I'm going to use, and I'm just going to call this foot unsharp undistort, and I'm gonna hit accept. I am going to render this out. If I Control F12, sometimes it will render the whole scene, but I can just close it and start again, and then it worked. Alright, now I'm gonna pause recording, and once it's done, I'm gonna come back. That didn't take too long. Now I can connect this to my output again. Over here, I can just delete this view layer because it's useless. And what I can do now is over here, load my unsharp undistort footage, plug this directly in here. And if you compare it to this, which is my footage with heightened contrast undistorted, if you compare, you'll see that it's the same thing. And now I can just mute these nodes by hitting M, and I'll come over to layout, and on my camera, I'm gonna choose the same unsharp undistort footage for my camera background. So when I look at it, I have a more true to life visualization of what my shot's gonna wind up looking like. So this is it for this tutorial. On the next tutorial, I'm going to tweak my light a little bit more and try to get it to look as closely as possible. Alright, see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye-bye.